My husband's family mocked my juvenile record for years. So I exposed their family's darkest secrets at my baby shower in front of everyone. I'm a 34-year-old lady who has been married to my spouse for just over 2 years. He hails from an old money family, the kind that casually mentions legacy and pedigree in everyday speech. They live in a separate world, with country club memberships, private schools, and vacation houses on the lake. My background is not like that. I grew up in a working-class area, where you learned how to mend a tire and save leftovers for the next meal. At 15, I committed a stupid mistake and shoplifted something tiny from a convenience store. I was caught, received a juvenile record, and spent the following decade ensuring that one incident did not define my life. I got my act together, graduated from high school with outstanding marks, received a computer science degree, rose up the ranks in technology, took some risks, and eventually founded my own firm. It took years, but the firm eventually took off. These days, I lead a wonderful team and help design things that have a genuine impact. You'd think that would be enough to get over an adolescent mistake, especially because I've never disguised it. My husband knew about it before we began dating seriously. He never raised the subject. His family, on the other hand, views it as an inside joke that they all get to enjoy at my expense. The first occurrence was subtle. We attended a family dinner a few months before the wedding. His father lifted a glass and joked about keeping treasures locked up, with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. The room laughed awkwardly, and I let it go. I assumed that was a one-off. But then his mother began referring to me as the comeback kid, at every occasion. Usually with a slight smile and just enough snark to make it clear she wasn't admiring me. I attempted to fit in. I offered to help wherever I could. I got his brother a job referral from a startup with which I had contacts. He created a website for his sister's handmade candle business. For nothing. None of it altered anything. The jokes kept coming. At a neighborhood barbecue thrown by one of their friends, his brother handed me a plastic fork with a wink and said, "Just in case anything goes missing." People laughed, but I noticed how some of them glanced at me, as if the joke was true. That night, I requested my spouse to say something. He admitted to me that he disliked the jokes as well, but felt compelled to protect me. I wanted to believe him, but it turned out they had brought up my juvenile past at his bachelor celebration. They recounted how he tamed the wild one and rescued a lost cause. I wasn't there, but a buddy of his took me aside and told me everything. The way they laughed, the way they made it seem like I should be grateful they let someone like me in. At that point, I gave up hope that they would grow out of it. I did not challenge them. I did not yell. I just started paying attention. I started digging. Not to create a fight, but to protect myself. I searched public records. I hired a background researcher who owed me a favor. I made a few silent calls. What I discovered stunned me. His uncle has a sealed case involving drunk driving and a hidden drone from years ago. His father had been mentioned in a tax inquiry that vanished before it made headlines. His cousin was dismissed from college for academic dishonesty, but the family told everyone she departed to pursue her ambitions. I did not say anything. I organized everything into a folder and locked it away. My husband wasn't aware of it yet. I didn't want to force him to do anything until it was absolutely necessary. But I wasn't going to stand there smiling if they continued to use my past as a party trick. Then came the baby shower for our first kid. We held it at our home and tried to keep it simple. My parents were present, as were other close friends. His family arrived early with great gifts and big smiles. His father rose up and made a toast. I hoped he'd be respectful for once. Instead, he added, "It's amazing what someone can accomplish after juvenile hall." Everyone chuckled as if it were just another comedic line. Except for this time, my folks were sitting right there. My colleagues. Our pals. That was the moment I realized I needed to act. Not to seek vengeance. Not to start any drama. But to establish a border they couldn't cross again. I'd been quiet for too long. They tried too hard to be kind. I wasn't the 15-year-old child they used to tease about. I had fought hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially those closest to my husband, drag that single moment around like a leash. The baby shower was hosted in our new house. We had just moved here a few weeks before, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I cleaned up the backyard, added extra seats, and hired a local bakery to handle the pastries. My husband handled the invites and decorations, and we made sure to include both sides of the family. His family arrived 20 minutes early. His parents had brought a mound of wrapped boxes. His brother arrived with a bespoke bassinet and a handwritten card, while his sister delivered a 3-tiered diaper cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine. On the surface, it all appeared generous. However, it did not take long for the old patterns to emerge. His father strolled in, glanced around and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Amazing what someone can do after juvenile hall." It was presented as a joke, but the way a few guests exchanged looks told me precisely what they were feeling. My hubby did not respond. He smiled weakly and proceeded to serve drinks. Later that evening, when we got a minute alone, he apologized for the remark. He noted how his father is just like that, brought up his blood pressure, and how the stress of the confrontation would exacerbate matters. It wasn't the first time he'd explained it as humor. I did not argue. I nodded, then returned to the party. While showing a few of the guests around the property, I observed his sister going slowly through my home office. I'd spent some time putting it together, a few framed medals, my company's emblem carved on a glass plaque, and images from our launch event. She stood by the desk, holding up her phone. I asked if she needed anything. She claimed she was only appreciating the setup. I let it go. That night, as everyone had left and we were tidying up, I checked my phone. A friend sent me a screenshot. His sister had shared one of the photographs from my office. The caption said, "From thief to CEO. Only in America." No tags, no names. But it didn't require any. Everyone who was familiar with our narrative would know who it was about. I showed my spouse. He encouraged me to breathe, that his sister did not mean any harm, and reminded me of his mother's high blood pressure and his father's difficulty sleeping. I informed him I was no longer asking for permission. This was not just a jest, it was humiliation disguised as family banter. And if they insisted on dragging my name, I would drag theirs as well. Not with lies. Just with the same honesty that they enjoy throwing at me. A few days later, we were invited to a brunch at his parents' home. We brought the infant, dressed in a blue onesie and matching booties. Everyone met in the garden area. While cooing over the infant, his mother handed me a dish and added, "Hope he doesn't inherit those sticky fingers." Another round of laughter ensued. I did not laugh. I stood up, carefully laid my dish down, and asked whether we were really going to keep doing this. I looked around the table and said that if we were going to joke about family history, we should cover everything. I cited his father's previous tax troubles, which mysteriously disappeared following an audit. His uncle's covert drunk driving incident, which involved a teenage cyclist. His cousin's academic controversy resulted in expulsion, despite the fact that they claimed it was a voluntary leave to pursue art. The laughs ceased. I did not raise my voice. I reached into the diaper bag and took out the folder I had been carrying. I placed it on the table. The tabs were labeled. I did not open it. I did not need to. Everyone understood what it was. His father rose, red-faced. His mother slammed the napkin down. Several of the guests stood up and left. A few people stared at their plates. Nobody said anything else to me. I scooped up our child, glanced at my husband, and we walked outside together. There was no shouting, no goodbyes. Just silence. That night, my husband and I sat in the nursery, rocking our son to sleep. He did not attempt to protect his family this time. We decided that we needed space. No more dinners, visits, or invitations. At least not until we determined what peace looked like for ourselves and our child. The day after brunch, we packed our belongings and booked into a hotel on the opposite side of town. Nothing fancy. Just clean, quiet, and far enough from the action to think clearly. We informed our neighbors that we were taking a few days off to rest. Nobody asked any questions. My spouse spent the whole of the first day scrolling through our baby's photos and pacing around the room. He wasn't upset by what I said over brunch. He admitted that the facts were true. What got to him was how everything unfolded in front of so many people. He kept returning to the scene, noting his father's reaction, his mother's expression, and how the guests froze. He never denied what they'd done over the years, but he hadn't intended it to be broadcast this way. I did not argue. I reminded him of every supper where I listened to their opinions. Every event where someone made a joke at my history as if it were family trivia. I had asked him to speak up more than once. Nothing has changed. I did not select public exposure because I want attention. I picked it because private chats proved ineffective. His father called 3 times in the afternoon. No apologies, no reflection. Just voicemails demanding that he rein in his wife and clean up the mess before the family's reputation suffered. He listened to one of them quietly, shook his head, and said he was done. He accessed his contacts and banned his number. Later that night, his mother texted him a long message full of passive-aggressive guilt, depicting me as vengeful, unstable, and dramatic. She claimed I humiliated them in their own house and poisoned the family. I responded with a brief note detailing the years of insults, screenshots of their online remarks, and examples of how they'd turned my background into a running joke. Then I blocked her phone number and social media accounts totally. The next day, I received an alert. His brother had silently unfollowed my company's page. That was hardly a surprise. However, a few hours later, he wrote on his own profile, "Some people dig their own graves, and then ask why no one's at the funeral." He didn't name anyone, but the timing was not subtle. I forwarded the article to a lawyer with whom I had previously worked on a commercial agreement. He read it over and determined that nothing I said at the brunch violated any laws. Everything I said was supported by records, public information and court files, confirmed dates. Still, I didn't want things to escalate online, so I wrote a message and mailed it to his brother. It was formal and forthright. I informed him that any more defamatory posts would result in legal ramifications, and that I had already achieved everything he had shared about me. The post was removed before the end of the day. He never responded. After that, I created a spreadsheet. I recorded every message, phone and post. I included timestamps, stored screenshots, and backed it up on 2 cloud drives. I had no intention of filing a lawsuit, but I wanted to be prepared in case things became even worse. Back at the motel, my spouse and I had our first real talk in weeks. No distractions. There is no familial meddling. I told him he could have any sort of relationship he wanted. With his parents, siblings, or anybody. But our child would not be part of it. Not if the environment remained poisoned. He nodded without hesitation. He agreed to postpone visits and deny calls, telling me that trust had to be earned, not inherited. We booked a counseling session for the same week. It was more than just damage management, we needed it. The therapist was calm and sharp, asking difficult questions. Within minutes it became evident that his avoidance, his silence, had played a significant influence in how long this had lasted. Not purposefully, but because of fear. He stated that he believed ignoring it would make it stop. Instead, it caused it to grow. I wasn't irritated during the session. I just recounted what had occurred. Name-calling, online remarks, the baby shower toast, and the brunch. The therapist did not jump to conclusions. She helped us devise a strategy. Part of it included what I suggested. A formal conversation with anyone in his family who truly wanted to repair trust, but not over dinner or casually. Only after they met 3 conditions: admit what happened, apologize without excuses, and agree on future boundaries. We stayed in the hotel for 4 nights. It wasn't a vacation, but it did provide us with some downtime. No visits, no texts, just time to ponder. When we departed, I felt like we had finally reached a conclusion. Not out of rage, but out of necessity. Several days after we returned home, I received a note from a mutual friend. It came from my husband's cousin, who had been quiet during the family upheaval but always polite. He expressed appreciation for what I had said during the breakfast and stated that someone needed to break the silence. He asked if we could meet privately. Not at his or my place, but somewhere neutral. We met at a tiny park across town. He showed it there with his own folder. He didn't want vengeance, he said. He only wanted to communicate. He explained that he was adopted into the family when he was a child, and while they provided for him materially, they always viewed him like an outsider. He explained how he was expected to protect their secrets, defend their image, and keep his head down, because simply being involved was enough. Then he said something that took me off guard. Years ago, my husband's family paid hush money to cover up a workplace harassment lawsuit involving his father. It had occurred while the father-in-law was still operating one of his businesses. The claimed victim was a junior employee. The relative had read some of the emails during his summer internship. He also discovered a few internal memos labeled confidential. He showed me screenshots and partial documents. The payoff was camouflaged by a civil settlement that never went to court. I hadn't planned to utilize any of it. I did not even copy it. I simply took notes on what he said and added the relevant data to my records. I thanked him for his faith and promised to keep his name out of any future developments. Before leaving, he warned me to be cautious. The family was not used to being questioned, especially from within. That following week, my husband organized a meeting between me and his sister. He hoped there was an opportunity to make things right. I agreed, but only provided we met in a public area. We chose a quiet cafe. His sister arrived dressed as if she were meeting a client for lunch. She smiled, ordered an expensive drink, and started making small chat. I got right to the point. She dismissed the remarks she had made throughout the years as innocent fun. I couldn't remember a single time she supported me, but she swore I had misconstrued her tone. The talk went nowhere. I rose up, paid for my coffee, and then went without saying anything else. Back at home, I reminded my husband that surface-level apologies were insufficient. Jokes that injure others are not harmless. And anyone who refused to recognize this had no place near our child. He did not argue. A few days later, he began individual treatment sessions. He wanted to know how he had let it all slip for so long. I explained to him that therapy was not about blaming, it was about accountability. If we were going to build a better home, we needed to start with the truth. Later that week, I went to get our son from daycare. A woman I did not recognize approached me outside. She introduced herself as a long-term friend of my husband's mother. She bent down, glanced at the baby and said, "Raising a little rebel, I see." She then walked away. I did not wait. I went directly to the daycare director and asked that all family and contact information be prohibited. I gave them a list of allowed individuals and asked that they notify me of any unexpected visits or queries. The director understood. Changes were implemented immediately. 2 days later, my husband's cousin reached out to me again. He had overheard a phone discussion between his mother and one of his uncles. The family was preparing a dinner, not to reconcile, but to set the record straight. Their purpose was to recast the brunch incident, spinning a story in which I was unstable, aggressive, and out to harm the family image. An invitation arrived via group email. I did not ignore it. I responded explicitly in the post, stressing that I would not attend any staged events designed to rewrite history. I made it clear that I would not participate in theatrics, and that anyone who continued to deny their behavior was allowed to do so, but not around me, my husband, or our child. Only one person replied, an uncle. He responded with a caustic reply, calling me theatrical, and accusing me of ruining the family ties. I did not respond. I saved the email, noted the date, and filed it alongside the rest. 2 weeks after the botched dinner stunt, I got a letter in the mail. It jumped out from the typical stack since it was handwritten, on thick paper, and had no return address. Inside was a folded message from my husband's aunt, carefully written in blue ink. She began by apologizing for not speaking out sooner. She stated that she had witnessed the comments, jokes, and quiet dogs but chose to remain silent in order to maintain peace. She stated that the family was completely aware of how I was being handled. They simply decided not to speak up since it was simpler to accept it than to confront it. I handed the letter to my spouse without saying a word. He read it twice. He recognized that the letter meant something, but he wasn't willing to mend any relationships without true accountability. We didn't respond. The letter was not a bridge, it was simply a confirmation. Over the next few days, my spouse stopped returning calls from his parents. He did not give a huge speech or publish anything significant. He just began refusing invitations, declining visits, and skipping his normal weekend check-ins. It was not unnoticed. His father sent a lengthy group mail accusing him of abandoning the family, being brainwashed, and allowing outside influences to undermine their foundation. After reading the message, he looked at me and handed me his phone. I blocked his father's phone number on his behalf. With the sounds muted, I began concentrating on something new. I had an idea for a long time, which came to mind after the first barbecue joke about plastic forks. A children's book. Not about me specifically. Just a simple story about second chances and how mistakes do not define you. I began outlining it at night, when our baby was asleep. While I was working on the manuscript one evening, my spouse received a message from an old childhood buddy. Someone who was present during our wedding planning, and had laughed along with the family jokes back then. This time, she sent a message expressing her remorse. She stated that she joined because it was easier. But she also mentioned that the family had been calling around, spreading rumors. Not just my past, but also my company. Whispering that I fabricated documents to obtain funds or use someone else's credentials to launch my first project. I contacted a public relations specialist the next day. Someone with experience in crisis reputation management. We sat together, and I laid out everything. Screenshots, dates, and messages. They got to work swiftly. Over the next week, they discovered a pattern of social media posts with IP ranges that corresponded to activity from my husband's brother's former employer. It was sloppy, but sufficient to demonstrate intent. I had the findings notarized, copied, and stored safely. Then came the moment that revealed how far the talk had spread. During a typical pediatric exam, the nurse made a passing comment about how nice it must be to have turned everything around. It was casual, given with a smile, yet it had a certain edge, as if she knew something. It was as if she had heard a version of my life that she didn't know. I did not raise my voice. I just corrected her, provided her with the right time frame, and explained that juvenile records were sealed and should not be discussed in the hallway. I asked for her name and took note of it. Then I wanted to talk with the clinic manager. When we came home that afternoon, my spouse expressed his desire to try one more thing. Not to fix the family, but to feel less alone. He organized a video chat with both sets of grandparents, his and mine, simply to converse. His purpose was not to fix what was faulty, but to determine if anyone from the older generation could grasp the big vision. The video call occurred on a Sunday evening. Both sets of grandparents were on. My spouse led the conversation. He did not raise his voice. I did not sugarcoat anything. He took them through the timeline, the years of subtle humiliation, the continuous jokes about my background, and the quiet that followed whenever someone crossed the line. He described why we had stepped away and what needed to happen before we could return. His grandparents did not argue. In fact, they performed better than expected. His grandfather leaned forward, saying he was tired of the family pretending that appearance was more important than morality. He told us a story that none of us had heard before. How he made a significant financial error in his 30s, a terrible investment that almost lost the family firm. But nobody made that into a punchline. Nobody used it to define him. He claimed what they had done to me was not only unfair, but also cruel. I remained quiet for the whole of the call. Let him talk. Allow them to listen. But for the first time, I witnessed someone on his side not just listen to us, but also stand up and say, "This was wrong." It did not repair everything, but it mattered. A few days later, my husband informed me that his cousin, the one who revealed family secrets, had decided to relocate out of state. He'd gotten a new job and was cutting ties with everyone but us. He stated that he was weary of walking on eggshells and wanted to start over somewhere where he would not be viewed as a liability. Around the same time, his sister reached out. She sent a message asking if they could meet at a spa to reset things. My hubby did not rush to accept. He asked for my opinion. I mentioned that it seemed like damage control rather than actual change. He agreed to meet, but only in a public place, and with a friend present for support. The debate ended abruptly, with no resolution, and only a boundary established where none had previously existed. The aftermath arrived the next day. His mother wrote a lengthy message full of guilt-tripping, veiled threats, and emotional manipulation. She discussed family loyalty, legacy, and how my spouse had changed. She made no mention of the real events, only blaming us for driving the family apart. Without consulting me, my husband permanently disabled his mother's phone number. After that, we sat down and made our decision. We would not be attending any family-hosted celebrations in the near future. No holidays, no birthdays. Especially not on our child's forthcoming first birthday. We didn't want to spend the day managing tensions or avoiding derogatory remarks. We desired bliss. We desired peace. So we devised our own schemes. We only invited those who had supported us, friends, neighbors, a handful of cousins, my husband's aunt, who had written the letter, and his cousin, who was due to leave. We hosted it in our garden, with minimal decor, a leased play area, and a handcrafted cake styled like a storybook. Only laughter, music, and space for our son to crawl about without hearing anything sharp disguised as a joke. After the visitors left and we cleaned up, I sat down at my computer and began writing something I'd been thinking about for weeks. This is not a letter to reconnect. Not an olive branch. Just a statement of record. Something to send if someone tries to contact you again without resolving the issue. I outlined the time frame, history, and expectations. I didn't mention any names. I did not make any threats. It was just a message. If somebody wanted to be a part of our life, they had to be honest and accountable, not nostalgic and denial. A week after our child's first birthday, I finished the letter. It was not emotional. It was not written as a plea. It was a formal, simple communication sent to every member of my husband's family. It recounted the sequence of events dating back to the initial incident, provided examples of recurring disrespect, described the emotional impact on our family, and concluded with 3 criteria for any future contact: truth, accountability, and permanent boundaries. Within 2 days, the responses began to come in. No apologies, only rage. Several of his cousins responded bitterly, accusing me of dividing the family and making a big deal out of nothing. I didn't participate. I blocked each of them and recorded the messages in my log. The only call with clarity was from my husband's grandmother. It lasted less than 30 seconds. She said, "You both did the right thing." And then she hung up. We drew a line in the sand that day. Not because we were angry, but because we had finally witnessed what peace could be like. And once you do, you can't pretend the turmoil was ever normal. 3 years have passed since the letter. Our son is 4 now, curious and gentle, unaffected by the shadow that once hung over our household. Last month, we received a formal envelope in the mail with an address I didn't know. Inside was an invitation to his grandfather's 75th birthday party. There was a handwritten note at the bottom that read, "No strings attached. Just family." My spouse stared at it for a long time before placing it on the counter. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think we've been here before," I said. That night, we spoke it out. Not in wrath or terror, but with understanding. We spoke about what walking back into that house would imply. What message would it convey to our son, who was now old enough to remember faces, detect tension, and absorb unspoken information? 2 days later, my husband's cousin, who had moved away, called. He had received the same invitation. He told us that his parents divorced last year, and that the family dynamic had changed. His father, one of the relatives who had been very harsh to me, had a health scare that seemed to change his mind. The cousin wasn't making excuses, but rather providing background. "Are you going?" I questioned him. "Only if you two are," she responded. "And only if we go in together." We decided to send a response that was neither an acceptance nor a rejection. My husband wrote a quick note stating that we would consider attending if his father was willing to meet with us privately first. We proposed a downtown coffee shop, neutral ground. To our amazement, his father consented. When we came, he was already there, but appeared smaller. 3 years had aged him more than time could explain. When we approached, he stood awkwardly and extended his hand to me first, rather than his son. "Thank you for coming," he replied, his voice lacking the assurance I remembered. The discourse was not dramatic. There were no tears or elaborate apologies. Instead, he spoke quietly about his regrets, about discovering too late what he had lost. He mentioned treatment, something I never expected from him. He discussed his own father's tendencies, which he had never questioned until they cost him his kid. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he added at length. "Just a chance to know my grandchild before it's too late." My husband and I shared glances. We had a lengthy discussion about our boundaries before coming. "We'll attend the birthday," I said. 2 hours no more. Our son stays with us at all times. One comment about my past, one whispered joke, and we leave permanently. He nodded and slipped an envelope over the table. Inside was a formal letter of apology, copied to everyone who had witnessed the brunch event 3 years prior. He had already sent it. "It won't undo anything," he responded, "but it's the truth." We went to the birthday party the following weekend. It was not ideal. Some family members were stiffly courteous, while others were truly kind. His mother hugged my husband for too long before offering me a tentative handshake. His sister kept her distance until our kid approached her, intrigued by her dangling earrings. As we were leaving, his grandfather, the man who had stood up for us during that years-old video conversation with both sets of grandparents, took my hand. "You know," he continued softly, "sometimes a family needs to break before it can heal properly." I didn't inform him that we weren't returning. Not really. That one nice afternoon did not undo years of abuse. That we were still monitoring and being cautious. Instead, I just nodded. On the way home, our kid fell asleep in his car seat, clutching a modest gift from his grandfather. A wooden puzzle box with a hidden chamber. "Are we doing the right thing?" my husband inquired, eyes fixed on the road. I returned my gaze to our sleeping son before turning to the man beside me, who had finally learnt to stand steady. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But I do know we're doing it right on our terms, with our boundaries. And that's not nothing." We did not really rejoin the family after that day. Instead, we maintained a deliberate and limited presence. Occasional lunches in public areas, short visits with obvious outcomes. Holiday greetings featuring professional family images but no personal updates. It was neither reconciliation nor forgiveness. It was coexistence, under certain conditions. My company continues to expand. This time around, I used my real name to publish my children's book. The folder containing family secrets remained hidden away. Not forgotten, but no longer important to be visible. We formed our lives around people who saw us for who we were and yet loved us. Friends become family. Neighbors who showed up without an agenda. Colleagues who respected limits. We did not have to burn bridges to attain peace. We simply needed to quit crossing the ones that led nowhere good.